One of them kicked one of the officers in the face.
Trying to process what you told me earlier, that this 15-year-old kid is going to walk for taking a shot at a police officer in broad daylight in New York City.
Who have they decided to let stay?
Welcome to No Border, No Country. What is the Biden administration doing in their agencies to keep the public uninformed about the true severity of the border crisis? We're talking about that today, and I'm joined by Judge Matt O'Brien. Matt, your department at the Immigration Reform Law Institute put out a report that shed some light on this question. What did you find out?
As we were looking at all the press releases that come out of ICE announcing the arrest of people who have broken the immigration laws, we noticed something that was a little off with the Biden administration, and that was they stopped naming the individuals. So they would put out a press release that says, ICE arrested an immigration law violator from Venezuela, and that's all that it would give in terms of information. So we said, is there a pattern going on here? And there was. And what we found was that during the Trump administration, 97% of the ICE press releases gave name, country of origin, and other biographical details about the people that ICE was arresting. However, under the Biden administration, it was only 67%. Now, two more interesting facts. Under the Trump administration, the 3% that weren't named, it was inevitably because ICE was having trouble identifying the person and establishing to a certainty who they were. However, in most of the cases under the Biden administration, the people that were actually named were people that the media or a local policing agency had already named. So it appears that there's a deliberate effort underfoot in the Biden administration to try and keep the names of aliens who are being arrested from the public.
Now, the average citizen who maybe doesn't follow these issues as closely as we do, or some of the people that regularly watch this program, might say, so what? Why does it matter?
Well, and that is an interesting question. I think that's probably most people's reaction. But here's the thing. So for government watchdog agencies, private sector NGO watchdog agencies like IRLI, members of the media, when the press still bother to report on any of this stuff, the way that you determine if this person who has been arrested has met with the penalty prescribed under the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is deportation from the United States, is to match their information with the publicly available information about the number of deportations, removals that ICE has actually effectuated. But guess what? You can't do that if they just say an individual from Venezuela. And the thing is, there's, a relatively circumscribed number of crimes that are going to result in people's deportations. And so it also creates a situation where they can just start recycling the press releases, because there's a lot of people from Venezuela in the United States, and there's going to be a lot of them over time that are arrested for, say, drug trafficking. So it creates this really odd situation where you have the government trying to hide information about the governmental functions that it's supposed to be engaged in from the public, so that the public can't hold the government accountable and figure out whether the government did what it's supposed to do. And this goes back to the whole old thing that your grandma probably said about sunshine being the best disinfectant, and that incredibly pompous tagline for the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness. It does indeed. Not that the Washington Post is doing anything to shed light on any of this, but the fact is it's a little scary that the government is trying to hide information. Now, why are they doing that? It seems like this is pretty consistent with the Biden administration's desire to let absolutely everyone who's a foreign national and wants to be here enter the country, stay here, and remain even if they have broken the laws.
We see this in the media as well. It's slightly different agenda, but anyone who follows these things, these news stories about things, you'll see something along the lines of a man was arrested for a DUI that resulted in the death of so-and-so, and then you have to go about 6 or 8 paragraphs down in the story. Oh, by the way, he's a native of another country who's here illegally, if they do that at all. So it seems like there's an attempt to, not just a CYA move on the part of the government officials, but by the media as well to sort of minimize the problem, to say, well, anyone could have committed that. But the reality is it's someone who shouldn't have been here in the first place.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's interesting because a lot of people think illegal alien, everyone who commits a crime is an illegal alien. There's a lot of people that have gotten vetted and gotten through the process and been accorded some kind of a lawful status who then invalidate their status by committing a serious crime, usually a felony, but not always. And those people are subject to deportation. So lawful permanent resident or green card holder, that's the technical name for a person that has a green card, is a bit of a misnomer because even as a lawful permanent resident, you can be deported if you commit a crime or you engage in certain other prescribed behaviors. And so, what we're seeing overall, I think, is this tendency of the media to act like no one who commits a crime is ever responsible for their actions, which has led to these crazy policies in places like New York and San Francisco with, they're not going to have any bail. Everybody's just automatically released until they can be tried. And this is an evolution on that where people who are guests in the country have been terrible guests, and yet the media and the government, which is charged with protecting the American public, are putting the quote-unquote privacy interests, which are non-existent in these circumstances, of these foreign nationals ahead of the national security and public safety interests of the American people. And that's just not acceptable.
Now, you mentioned earlier that it's when they do this practice, it's harder for watchdog groups to follow what's going on. Talk about that a little more in terms of when they say the name, now you have a name to attach to that crime. You can follow if he was actually deported, what happened. If they don't do that, he's like a ghost, basically. There's no way to know if he ever got deported or what happened to him.
Well, I mean, if you look at this, and I'll just use Venezuela again as an example. Venezuelans have been streaming over the border since the situation got bad in Venezuela. There have been particularly large numbers of them who have come over the border since the advent of the Biden administration. So if I says a Venezuelan national was arrested in, St. Paul, Minnesota for drug trafficking, and they don't give any other additional information about the person's name, where they might have resided within the city, what other crimes they might have been charged with, whether they have an extensive criminal history, then anyone who wants to verify this is stuck looking at ICE's statistics. And given the large number of Venezuelans who are in the country currently, you're going to have a higher proportion of them being removed. And then when you take this to countries like Mexico that have massive numbers of people in the United States, it's like trying to look, for a needle in a haystack, because which Mexican national that got convicted of X, Y, or Z was it that was removed? On the other hand, when you have a name, an address in some cases, you've been in journalism and media for a long time. You can remember the crime blotter from like when we were kids would say something to the effect of John Doe was arrested in Boston, Massachusetts for DUI on Boylston Street. He's a longtime resident of Medford, Massachusetts and it would actually give the person's address as a matter of public record. And so the less information that you have, the easier it is for these people to hide. And if you're the Biden administration, which has publicly stated with the Mayorkas memorandum, which established the quote-unquote priorities for ICE to remove people, basically said that it was going to take every case, even when the Immigration and Nationality Act said the crime that this person has been convicted of means that they must be deported. The IRLI Mayorkas ICE has decided that they're going to take into account all the extenuating circumstances. And so when an administration makes that kind of announcement and then starts hiding names and biographical information, you have to wonder, who have they decided to let stay?
Now, people who are susceptible, gullible to the propaganda of the anti-borders movement will say things like, they'll hear this broadcast and they'll say something like, well, you're painting them all with a broad brush and not everyone's a criminal and you're demonizing these people. Okay, let's get the disclaimer out of the way. Not every single person who comes across the border illegally is a violent criminal. Okay, fine, we said it. However, within that population is a subset of some really dangerous people. And we have some clips here to show what that's all about, because we're talking about murder, we're talking about assault, we're talking about really bad stuff. So let's go ahead and play this, and I'd like to hear what you say about this, Matt.
Year-old. As an adult, investigators say he opened fire inside a Times Square sporting goods store. Chaos ensued. One bullet hit a tourist in the leg. Police say the teenager also fired at officers.
Is that the future valedictorians we've been promised?
No, I don't think it is. And to go back to your earlier point, yes, it is true that not everybody who comes here and sneaks into the country is a violent criminal. However, everyone who sneaks into the country, by definition, is a criminal, because under 8 United States Code, improper entry by an alien is a criminal offense. It's a misdemeanor, but nonetheless, it's a criminal defense. And if you do it multiple times, then it eventually becomes a felony. So, a lot of the people that are going, well, this isn't a crime, it's just a civil violation. No, most of the time, because of the way the government bureaucracy works, it's much more convenient for the government to engage in civil removal proceedings. But under the Trump administration, Donald Trump announced a zero-tolerance policy and started prosecuting everyone who was encountered as an illegal alien as a misdemeanor criminal. So that's issue number one, because generally speaking, if you come into the country illegally, you're living in the shadows, you're not connected to the society at large, you're still speaking a foreign language, and you've begun your relationship with the country by committing a crime, it gets very, very much easier to commit other crimes. The number of people that I encountered when I was an ICE trial attorney who were in prison on drug trafficking charges because somebody said, hey, you're having a little trouble making money, you're tired of cleaning toilets, you want to deliver a package for me. And they got an Amtrak and took a package from, Yonkers to Miami, or Miami to Yonkers, that happened to have 8 pounds of cocaine in it. I'm sorry, but you can't tell me that these people, well, they don't speak English and they're simplistic and they don't understand. It drives me nuts, because the Open Borders contingent wants to portray all migrants as hapless victims who have no agency when it's convenient for them to do so, but then they want to portray them as the valedictorians, the next Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, whenever it's convenient for them to do so. And the fact is, both of those things can't be true at once.